grateful for those who came before us, who helped to provide these freedoms. We are grateful for those who lead us in our community, for Mayor Lewis and all those who sit in council with him, and we ask a blessing to be with them all. May they be blessed with health and strength and endurance. May they be blessed with wisdom and clarity of thought and expression. And may they know of our support for them. We are grateful for those who serve us, who are at times in harm's way. We ask for thy protection to be with them. And we pray for an effective meeting, pray for unity and resolution. And we're grateful again for this opportunity to meet. We ask a blessing for those members of our community who are struggling, those who are weak or elderly or afflicted or destitute or feel lonely or forgotten. May they be blessed, and may we do what we can to help to provide an environment where they receive comfort. Now we express again our appreciation and love to thee for all of our blessings, and do so in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, President Brady. We really appreciate it. And you're not obligated to stay either through the evening, but we're happy to have both of you and your lovely wife that we know so well. So public comment time, and with public comment, we give 10 minutes for public comment. We ask that you come to the podium here and give your name and your address, and to not speak for more than 2 minutes. And with that, we'll ask anyone who would like to come up and make a statement. You're welcome to do so. Seeing none, we will go on to the next item of our agenda, unless somebody now wants to get up because it seems short. We'll look for an approval of minutes of our previous meeting held September 11th, 2018. Any corrections or additions that have been noticed by the council?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move that we approve those minutes.
Thank you. Second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, those minutes are approved. Council reports. Richard.
Nothing for this evening, thanks.
Thank you. Beth.
I don't have anything today. Thank you.
Chris has something because he's tipping his hand here. Chris.
Mayor, I attended the Freedom Light Festival this last weekend, and what a wonderful, wonderful event that takes place in the city. I had no idea the Mayflower had 8 cannons, but no one could shoot them. So I'm not sure what good they were. But we were at the Native American little booth there. Little boy came up to me and, "Mister," I says, "Yes." He said, "Do you know why Indians don't drink tea?" "I don't know, young man, I don't know." "Because they don't want to die in their teepee."
Oh my gosh.
Oh boy.
Oh my gosh. That's good. And remember, and we're so happy. We're so happy, Chris, that this is documented for all time.
All time.
This is all for all time. Anything else, Chris?
No, that was.
By the way, Chris, Delaney England sent me a note when I was away from here, and just said how much she appreciated that you attended. Kendall.
Nothing tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for those council reports. We'll consider approval of expenditures greater than $1,000 paid September 3rd and 10th, 2018, and the July 2018 financial report. Any discussion about that? Or
move to approve as printed.
Thank you.
Second.
Thanks for the second. From was that from you? Yeah. From Beth?
Okay.
Put Beth as a second. And any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. We want to let's see. We want Chad Wilkinson now to talk about item number 6, which is approval of an ordinance. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of the council, tonight we're going to discuss an item that you actually had requested us to bring forward a few weeks ago. You'd asked us to look at changing our accessory dwelling unit standards to potentially allow for non-relatives to occupy those units. Right now, our ordinance allows for an accessory dwelling unit, which is just what it sounds like. It's a secondary unit on a lot, subject to some standards, some pretty strict standards. One of those standards is that we require that the accessory dwelling unit can only be occupied by relatives, close relatives. In fact, the ordinance defines who that is, and it's children, parents, siblings, grandchildren, and grandparents are the people that are limited to that accessory. We've looked at this issue over the last few weeks, and even before that, because we have received requests to allow non-relatives before. And you know, there's a variety of ways to potentially allow for this to happen. And as staff, we don't have a great amount of concern if we extend that to non-relatives. I guess for a couple of reasons. One reason is that right now, at the beginning of the process, we require a conditional use permit that goes through our administrative committee that's approved. At the time that that's approved, we require a deed restriction to be signed by the property owner that says they'll follow all the rules of the accessory dwelling unit. But other than that, we really don't have a way of tracking who's in those units. We don't go out on a yearly basis and say, are you still renting to a family member? What we found, though, what's key and what's really the most important part is that those units only occur on an owner-occupied property. So what that means is that the owner has to live at that property, so it doesn't turn into a duplex situation. The owner of the units lives right there. If neighbors have concerns, they can go directly to the owner to resolve those concerns.
Chad, excuse me, could I ask you a question that was brought to me this afternoon on that? If the owner, say they go on a mission, so they're no longer occupying it, but they own it, would that be an exception? I mean, is that?
I think I'll cover that in just a second, Chris. Yeah. So what we found again is that that's the main component that's required to be there for this to have the least amount of impact. Does that mean that there's zero impact? No. We do have the one complaint that we still get with some of these that are permitted units is parking. We still do get that complaint. People will call up and say there's an awful lot of vehicles parked on the street in front of this house or neighbor's house. So we've looked at a couple of things in this proposed ordinance to try to address some of the things that we've seen as deficiencies over the years with this current ordinance, as well as allowing for relatives or non-relatives to occupy the unit. So I'm going to go through actually each of the changes because there's not that many. I'm going to go through those briefly and then we can have a discussion about those. But first of all, accessory dwelling unit right now is defined actually in our definition section of code as, I'll scroll down so you can see the strike-through language, but that strike-through language says that it's a living unit located on the same property as a principal dwelling occupied by a relative or relatives of the principal occupant of the principal dwelling. So we define it that way right now, so we would have to change that to something else. So our proposed definition is that it's a dwelling unit within an owner-occupied single-family residence or located on an owner-occupied property that's either incorporated within the single-family residence or in a detached building which maintains complete independent living facilities for one or more persons, including permanent provisions for living, sleeping, eating, cooking, sanitation, separate kitchen and or laundry facilities. So that would be the new proposed definition to change that to allow for non-relatives. We also thought it was important to add a purpose section. This has been something that, you know, over the years there's been I guess, various levels of comfort in proposing these types of units in a city. When Bountiful originally allowed these, they put the restriction of relatives only to try to address some of those concerns. These units can also provide for some desirable things in our community, which is to allow for some additional moderate income housing opportunities in our city and give opportunities for folks that may have some empty space after their kids have left that want to try to supplement their income, and so there's various reasons why these are potentially a positive thing for the community. So we've added that purpose section to our code that doesn't exist there right now. I'm not going to go through each of those individually, but they're in your packet. Now to the meat. We have, again, beefed up. Right now our ordinance does require that the owner live there, but it's not as explicit as we'd like to be. It's implicitly there that says that the accessory unit has to be relatives of the principal owner occupants. We'd like to beef that definition up a little bit if we're going to make this change. So that definition on the screen addresses that. The property owner, which shall include title holders, contract purchasers, must occupy either the principal unit or the ADU, but not both, as their permanent residence, and at no time receive rent for the owner-occupied unit. Application for an ADU shall include proof of owner occupancy as evidenced by voter registration, vehicle registration, driver's license, etc. So I think that gets to your question, Chris. If it's still their permanent residence based on those types of evidence, we'd still consider that their permanent residence if they were on a temporary absence from that place. Other cities have addressed that in different ways by saying they've put a year. I think Salt Lake has some type of a exception for absences of 3 years or less or something like that. I don't think we have to get that complicated. We can if you'd like, but I think it's fairly straightforward.
I just have a question about where it says at no time receive rent for the owner-occupied unit. What is that? Do you mind explaining that? Yeah,
it's actually a really important distinction because that's what keeps this from being a duplex, essentially. So if that's not being rent, if that principal unit or the owner-occupied unit's not, there's no one receiving rent for that, that's not a duplex at that point.
Okay. So this has nothing to do. You can charge someone to live in your basement in your mother-in-law.
In the accessory unit, yeah. But the owner-occupied unit, you wouldn't charge rent for. So rent for one, not rent for both. Yep. And I'll get into that in just a minute. Well, it actually is in that definition. We did feel like there might be a situation where somebody might want to have the owner live in the smaller of the two units, the accessory unit. As an example of that, if you had a parent-child situation where you had some parents that wanted to downsize and they had some kids that had a couple of kids of their own that wanted the big part of the house, we don't want to restrict someone from living in that accessory unit. So that's why it says the owner-occupied unit. It doesn't say the accessory unit. It's whichever one the owner's in, you can't receive rent for that unit. That makes sense? Okay. So number 7, we struck through in this proposed ordinance. Again, that's the relative residency requirement. A couple of things that we really needed to beef up a little bit. Again, as we were in this ordinance, we thought we might as well fix some things that have been problematic as we've enforced these. We did want to make sure that it was clear that a separate entrance to the ADU, if it's a basement or a detached unit, needs to be someplace that it doesn't change the appearance. The idea is that this is supposed to be somewhat invisible to the neighborhood, that it shouldn't appear like it's a duplex or a separate or some use that wouldn't be allowed in a single family zone. So that addresses that entrance requirement, number 9. And then parking. Parking is the one thing that we receive complaints on, even these permitted units. We have several's low. We have dozens of these that are allowed permitted units that we've permitted over the years. We still get calls on some of these occasionally about parking. So we have clarified. The code already said that they had to meet our minimum parking standard, but we found that that's not enough to let people know what that standard is. So we've included a very clear statement that it has to have at least 4 off-street parking spaces with at least 2 of those spaces in the garage. And this is the key thing: any additional occupant vehicles need to be parked off-street in city code compliant parking areas. We want to make sure that these areas have enough parking. Now, this is important to mention that what that means is that there might be times where an accessory unit can't be permitted. I mean, that's an important distinction to make, but if we have a very small lot that just doesn't have enough parking to accommodate everybody that would be a part of there, we might have to tell them no. So I want to make sure that that's clear, that this is something that could restrict some of these units. One thing that we found is that on an attached accessory dwelling unit, we had a limit of 25% in the past. We've had that. And typically, if someone wants to put a unit in their basement, they want to rent out most of that basement. They want most of that to be used. And this 25% rule has caused a lot of people problems. It's caused people to have to get really creative with these accessory units and create common spaces that don't make a lot of sense. The reason for that is if someone builds a home with a basement, they may not be thinking about having an accessory unit in the basement someday, and so they might put their mechanical room in some place that is inaccessible from the primary unit except for going through the accessory unit. It's things like that. So what we've proposed is that we bump that square footage requirement up to 40%, which would still be a secondary use. Again, it's not the majority of the use, but it would allow for some additional flexibility in laying these things out in a way that makes sense. It's just, we've had some folks that have had to get really, really creative with these, and when I say the word creative, I mean things that really are not practical. I mean, that's the bottom line. They just don't, it'll work. So we think that this will help facilitate these in the basement a little bit better. And that's really
Chad?
addressing that, yeah.
I apologize. I know you're keeping going on, and I just wanted to go back to number 8.
I think that's the last one, Beth, so you're good.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yep.
Well, I interrupted you at a good time then. On number 8, there's no change to it. It's not highlighted in any way. But I thought that there probably should be some clarity on this, because it simply states separate utility service connections shall not be allowed. But if you have a separate building, there will be a separate connection, but you mean not a separate person signing up for utilities.
Yeah, separate meter, separate.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking there should be clarity for a totally detached unit, because there will be a separate service line, would there not be?
Usually that service line's coming from the home, though.
So it would just be,
Yeah, I mean, we have some where they take a
Okay.
separate line from the meter, but usually it's coming right from the home. Hasn't been a problem with administering so far. We could clarify that if you want, but yeah, the big thing there is we don't want to have 2 meters. It can't be set up as a duplex. It's got to be part of that unit. We don't have. I'm trying to think of a percentage of these we have detached. Lloyd might want to chime in. I'd say most of the ones we see are in the basement, wouldn't you say? I mean, I don't know what the percentage would be. Probably 80% or so of these are basements, wouldn't you say? Maybe even more than that? Maybe more. Yeah. So we don't get a lot of detached. Occasionally we do. But we can... Was that me? We can clarify that if you'd like. We can definitely... We can throw the word meter in there or whatever we need to clarify that.
I was just thinking it might be simpler for people to understand on a detached type of format, just in case they're building a new detached structure, and that they understand that a separate maybe connection doesn't mean that they, does that make sense? I just want to make sure that that's understood. But if it's only 8% of what we have, it might not be worth it unless we, I don't know. I'm either way on that one. I think probably clarification is the better part of communication, right?
Sure. I could be trying to think of the way to say that a little bit better as you're having your public hearing and come back with some potential language. Does that work? While you guys are having the public hearing, I'll kind of think through that and see if I can come up with some
Thanks,
wording.
appreciate that.
Okay, I think I went through all the language except for one. I did find one more. That's just a cross through, and that's again, we already have number 7 covered up above. So we found that was stated twice in the code, so we might as well take that out now while we're changing the ordinance. So number 7 under the detached accessory, or excuse me, under the attached accessory structure, that would be completely stricken through because we've already got that stated in a previous section. So that constitutes all of the changes that we're proposing. We did take this to the Planning Commission a week ago. It seems like longer than that to me, but it was just a week ago. And we had a little bit of discussion. I included some of that in your packet, but we had discussion about what constitutes a family. I thought that was worth discussing here really quick because some codes distinguish a maximum number of people that can live in the accessory unit. We would treat it just as another dwelling unit, and state code defines what a family is as up to 4 unrelated individuals. It can be any number of related individuals. We have not restricted that, but it potentially could create a situation where you had multiple adults living in a accessory dwelling unit. There's 2 ways to look at that. One is that it could cause some potential concerns, but we also have a standard in there that constricts or restricts this based on parking. And you're going to just have to, we would again emphasize that these have to be approved, and we would definitely not want to change the requirement for a conditional use permit. There has to be a public hearing that gives the neighbors a chance to know that this is coming. And with that conditional use permit, we let them know the standards, we review the standards, we make sure up front that they have enough parking. If they don't have enough parking, we simply have to tell them no. But we feel like that probably will address this in most cases. I can't think of a situation where we've had multiple adults living in an accessory unit. Usually it is a couple or an individual, but certainly that's worth discussing. It was a concern that the Planning Commission brought up. And our proposal right now is just to follow the state law definition of what a unit is. So
What was the planning commission vote?
it was 6 to 1. We did have one dissenting vote. Yeah. And I think that I think it was Tom Smith, wasn't it?
It was.
And I think he expressed that he was concerned about just the overall impacts to neighborhoods that extending this to non-relatives could potentially create.
Is the conditional use permit, does that follow the home if the home is sold or whatever, or do people have to then reapply for a new conditional use permit?
Right now, it goes with the property. Yeah, we could look at that, but right now it would go with the property. They'd still be subject to all the requirements, though. And one of the things we do, and we would continue to do, is recording a deed restriction that puts a future owner on notice that this is not a duplex. It's an accessory dwelling unit. It can't be rented out as a duplex. Whether someone reads that title report, that's something we struggle with all the time. But that does at least provide them with notice, effective notice that, when you buy this, it's not being purchased as a duplex. Any other questions?
Any other questions?
One other question, Chad. Number 2 at the bottom of page 33 talks about that 5% shall not exceed 5% of the buildable land. And just running the numbers from our write-up here, if you have an 8,000 square foot property and you use 5% of it, that's 400 square feet for your unit that you're limited to. Or if you have a detached unit and you have a 8,500 square foot lot, which is pretty typical downtown, that limits you to 420 square feet. Why are we limiting this to smaller than we would for the normal accessory dwelling units that people can build on their property?
That was something that was in the previous ordinance, so I don't know all the reasons other than I think they were trying to keep that as an accessory use on the lot. We haven't run into that being a problem very often. We don't get a lot of them on 8,000 square foot lots, quite honestly, but the ones we do, you do want to keep something that makes it proportional to the size of the home, so you don't want to have, but the 40% of the square footage might do that. The 10% limit on the accessory dwelling unit, excuse me. This is a common thing that happens at the counter every day. There are accessory buildings and accessory dwelling units. They're not the same thing. Accessory buildings are limited to 10% of the lot area. So maybe it is reasonable to bump it up to match what our accessory building requirement is.
It puts us at a minimum size shall be 350 square feet. Maximum size might be 400 square feet. Why do we want to shoehorn that range in there?
Yeah, potentially. We do, most of these go in on bigger lots, but
Agreed.
Yeah. Yep.
So would it be offensive to you if we bumped that up to 10%?
I wouldn't be offended.
How does the council feel about that?
I think that's a good
I
suggestion.
think that's a really good suggestion, Richard.
Most of the discussion at Planning Commission, ironically, hung on the definition of facilities, kitchen and laundry facilities. And the previous ordinance had had tried to capture with language as many of these potential non-conforming units as possible and bring them in under this umbrella. Is that not the case, Chad?
It's true.
And so because we weren't listing in our code that they were required to provide these amenities in a kitchen plus laundry facilities or whatever else, some of the Planning Commission initially was hesitant to move forward because they felt like those facilities wouldn't be provided, which is not the case. The language was just there so that we could define as many as possible of the non-conforming types of mother-in-law apartments into our ordinance. So
Right.
That's
And
what most of the discussion was.
It was a lot of discussion about that and the family definition. The reason for adding laundry facilities is that kitchens, usually a unit is defined as, in other words, a residential dwelling unit is defined as a unit that has separate housekeeping facilities, and usually that's defined as a separate kitchen. Cooking facility is what the definition says. What we found with these accessory dwelling units is sometimes folks can get by with just a microwave and a hot plate and a fridge and a sink, and that, under our definition of kitchen, doesn't make it. That, in fact, it's specifically excluded from our definition of kitchen if you have just microwaves and hot plates and things. So we're not trying to be punitive, but we are trying to recognize that what we're trying to do here is provide for a secondary unit and some of those might not meet our definition of having a kitchen, but they're still a secondary unit. So we added that laundry to say, hey, this is another way that somebody might have a separate unit, is if they have that separate housekeeping facility. And we've seen this happen, not just with the kitchen or laundry facilities, but with dishwashers and things like that, where our code defines kitchen as cooking facilities, but sometimes even just having a separate dishwasher, people can get by with a microwave and a hot plate. So what Richard said is right. The attempt was just to try to capture a few more of these, just again to try to mitigate impacts on neighbors. That's the bottom line. We think this is a good use, but we also know that it's a use that could potentially have impacts on neighborhoods. So we want to make sure we're mitigating that to whatever extent we can.
Any other questions? With that, we will open this to a public hearing and request again anyone who wishes to come up to the microphone, please do so by name and by where you live. And we're happy now to turn some time over to you for public comment. Okay, with that, we will, okay, oh.
I'll just wait to see if anybody else is going to say anything. Kenny Knighton. So, as I understand it, Chad, to do this, you got to have a two-car garage. As I read this, they'd have to have a two-car garage. True?
Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to get more housing opportunities. So I remember the discussion on downtown when we had the public clamor about, bringing all these extra people into Bountiful and the drug dealers and the extra traffic it's going to bring. And I'm sure you all remember that. And, how it's going to, the garbage trucks were going to make noise. But we're going to have all these cars parked out in front now. Well, so you know that my issue is with the downtown area. So I'd like to ask the council to direct or ask our city staff to come up with some reasonable tools to help put some of these people in the downtown area. For people like myself who have risked our own money to try to build up the downtown area. I think there's a lot of people that can use this type of facility, but realize these cars are all going to be parked in the driveways in front, something we can't do downtown. So we're going to have all of these cars parked there in the wintertime. We're going to be having problems with that. I think that people are doing it now anyway. I think we all know that. They're already doing it. But look we just downzoned so much of the downtown area for single family houses. So now those houses are going to be but not called duplexes. So that's my point. I'd like to see some tools in allowing more density in the downtown area. We're already restricted with height, we're restricted with width, we're restricted in parking areas. I'd like some help with that and help downtown put some more density there. We just approved a school downtown. We're not going to have any more housing downtown. So there's no housing going with the school. We just approved having Alpha Graphics, a wonderful facility, but no more housing downtown. It's strictly for commercial use. So if we really want to see something downtown, we need some tools to do that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I'm Ethel Black, and I live downtown. And I moved downtown because it was close to all the things we could do, but it wasn't such high density and tons of apartments, although in my 16-block area, half of it's apartments. And my concern at the work meeting was, is this going to be just considered for downtown, or is it going to be throughout the city? Can't we put some of this higher density and more people up on the mountainside or in the other neighborhoods? Downtown isn't the only neighborhood in Bountiful City, and that's my concern. And I was glad to hear that you had to have 2 cars in a garage and 2 in the driveway. I don't like the on-street parking. I think it makes it hard to clear the snow. I think it's bad for people driving and everything else. So I felt like they did a good job at the planning meeting explaining this, and I was glad to hear that it was for all of Bountiful City and not just for our little downtown area that is getting such a high density living in it.
Thank you. Any other comments? Is that long enough? With that, we will close the public hearing, and we'll look for any questions or discussion. Any other questions for Chad?
Mayor, can I ask a question on Richard's suggestion? Shall not exceed 5%. Do we need to have a motion to go to 10?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we'd want you to include that in the
We'll need to
motion.
include that.
Yeah,
That would be included in the motion.
Yeah, you'd want to make that change.
if
with
so
that-
moved, yeah.
Yeah, so with that, I would look for a motion.
Before we do that, if
Please.
I want to just talk with Beth about the language. Councilor Holbrook, we could change that if you'd like. One option, just keeping it simple, just change that to separate utility meters shall not be permitted for the accessory dwelling unit. I mean, that's a simple way to do it. If that's a concern, we could be that
Makes it pretty clear.
clear.
I think that's pretty clear, and I feel like
It's a good
even though it is only 8%, it could conceivably change at some point during the, in the course of the next couple of years. So yeah, I'm good with that. So I'd like to incorporate that change in
Okay, so that would be for number
number 8.
Okay.
Mhm.
And how did you phrase it again, Chad?
I said separate utility meters shall not be permitted for the accessory dwelling unit. That would be pretty all-encompassing, including anything that's not under our jurisdiction, like gas meters and whatever else too. So,
Good. Chad, anything else? Otherwise, we'll look for a
no,
motion.
thank you.
One other comment
Sure.
concerning what Mr. Knighton talked about. Chad, when we went through the last revisions of the downtown area, I know there was discussion about wanting some flexibility on the small, difficult lots to develop so that something could happen there. And anyway, I don't know where we ended up with that, or if that was just a nice thought that didn't get incorporated. But talk about that for a second.
Yeah, we did. We actually reduced our minimum lot size for the zone, so that some of those smaller lots that were previously prohibited from mixed-use development, most of those would have just been eligible for a single-family dwelling. We reduced that so that they could potentially build mixed use, including multiple residences on those lots. So that was included. We have some, other requirements, off-site requirements. We had a discussion about parking, though, and this was something that occurred at the Planning Commission, and our Planning Commission is very concerned about parking impacts. And so they had some long discussions about that. They made some standards that, again, were suggested by the Planning Commission, not by staff, that required that we had adequate parking on site. And they were specifically talking about townhomes and not using spaces in driveways to count towards minimum guest parking requirements, things like that. So while there was some flexibility that was added, there's also some concern about being too flexible and having impacts from parking that the Planning Commission saw as being an issue. So maybe that answers the question. So there was some additional flexibility added, but there was also some additional standards added related to parking.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? I'll look for a motion then.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move that we approve this ordinance as edited by Chad. This proposed amendment to section 14-14-124 and chapter 3.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Richard. Any further discussion?
Do we need to enumerate those changes, or are we fine?
So I'll just enumerate them for the record. That was
Please.
a change to number 8 under under the, let me get the section number here. So it's under letter C, number 8. We changed the definition related to utilities to say separate utility meters should not be permitted for the accessory dwelling unit. And then we changed the standard under, let's see what that letter is. Yes, number 2 under letter D to shall not exceed 10% of the buildable land of the lot.
Good. Thank you. Any further discussion?
Just one quick comment
please.
on that. Oh, my apologies. I thought it was going to change the next one, which was shall be at least 350 square feet. Sorry, that won't change. Thank you.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. And Mr. Wilkinson, you're up again.
Yes, thank you. This will be really quick. You're aware of the Holbrook Canyon bridges that we received a grant for from the county. They have asked us that in addition to signing the agreement, that we adopt this agreement, this interlocal agreement, by resolution of the council. So that's what we're here to do tonight. Part of your adoption of that resolution would be to authorize the mayor to sign that interlocal agreement. The interlocal agreement is essentially a reimbursement agreement. The county agrees to reimburse us for up to $20,000 of the cost of those first two bridges there on the lower part of Holbrook Canyon. The exciting news, we first thought that the federal government might not want us to build those bridges on their property, and they have said they would love to have us work with them and build the bridges on their property. So we'll be able to start in the right order from bottom to top instead of top to bottom, and we're excited about that. Think it'll happen fairly quickly too. So, so with that, we are recommending approval that the City Council adopt Resolution 2018-11 authorizing the mayor to enter into an interlocal agreement with Davis County for the construction of the bridges in Holbrook.
So moved.
Second. What do you think the time frame is?
We have to have it done within 2 years. We're going to try to get up and do some initial design work this fall when the leaves are off the trees and we can see things. And when I say see things, I mean the satellite can see the equipment. So yeah.
That's awesome.
Good. I appreciate all of you. We miss Richard, who would say compel mayor to sign it, but
you mean Mark? You mean Mark, not Richard.
Oh yeah, I mean excuse me, not Richard, but yeah.
You've already forgotten the council member over there.
Yeah, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Thank you. And we're going to turn some time over to Mr. Allen,
who's companionless tonight, I might add.
Apparently, she finally listened or realized that it was going to take more than 5 minutes. I got away with it a couple of times.
Sorry you're always last, Alan.
Yes, I appreciate that. Mayor and Council, I'm privileged to be here tonight with several items and quite a list, and I'll try and go through them fairly quickly for you. But the first one we have is our 138 project, which I'll just quickly say it is on track. We do have the south portion of it dismantled, and we're tearing it apart and on our way back together. We're still on track to have it sometime. We're looking at like the first week in December, and we think we should have the second transformer back in place. So it is working. But this is along the project as we've been working, as we've had several hiccups as we've gone through. One of them was when the transformer failed. We've had to be working with Pacific Corp to intertie into it, had some additional work, some drainage issues and things we worked through. So there's some areas on the design that was outside of our original scope that we anticipated. And what this is for ECI, for the additional work they've done on the project, so we've got the money to finish the project to get us back through and have the as-built on the project. So what staff and the Power Commission, I will say on all these, we took it to the Power Commission this morning, and Councilman Knight was there, and we went through all these, and they do come with the Power Commission recommendation on all of them. So it'd be the staff and the Power Commission's recommendation that we approve the additional $50,000 for ECI engineering for a not to exceed total of $610,000 for our 138 substation project. Again, this is within the dollars that we have budgeted in our project for this year.
Thank you. Any discussion or questions?
Move to approve.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, and that passes. And next.
All right, the next one we have is we have some vehicles, and we're doing something a little different. Is we're buying most of the vehicles all at once. Typically, we seem to come through a little bit at a time all at once, so we'll go through several of them. And what we buy vehicles, we go to the state bid and get the state bid, but we also went to our local supplier and gave them an opportunity to supply a bid to compare it to see where it is, just to give us an opportunity. So you'll notice that we've got a little bit of both. But on the first one we have is to replace a 1996 truck that's used at our power plant, and they work at the power plant and also help maintain the hydro. And this would be a replacement truck. It would be a new double cab truck where they can carry manpower and supplies up to the hydro. And this one would be going to the low bid, which would be Performance Ford for the total of $30,961. And again, all these vehicles and the box thing we have are all within what we had budgeted this year's budget.
I'm impressed that it was a 96 and you're finally retiring it. That's
That's
excellent.
pretty good,
I think
isn't it?
that thing's amortized like 5 times. That's
Yeah.
great.
Good stuff.
Well, I will say that's one of those trucks at the plant, it looks just like the power plant. I mean, it's getting to the point that it's starting to have some mechanical issues and leaking oil and what have you. But it still looks like a truck that should be out there. I mean, it is really, they've done a great job of taking care of it, so.
Well done.
Look for a motion.
So moved, Mayor.
Second?
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes. And number 10, Alan.
All right, the next one we have is replacing two trucks that will be the extended cab trucks, and they're replacing two 2006 trucks. These are vehicles that are used for our metering department. And on top of this, the purchase will still have to put a shell, and they have a pull-out drawer where they put their tools and stuff on it. But we did go out to bid to replace both of these trucks. And basically, the price of them again would be through Performance Ford for the two trucks, the two 150 trucks with extended cab, for a total of $56,792 for the two vehicles. And again, this would be through Performance Ford.
I have a question. Like, how many miles did they have on since they drive and meter every day?
These
That had to have been a lot.
two vehicles are up around 80,000 miles on both of them, and are getting to that point where they're starting to give us some troubles. That's why we're looking to change them. So again, these are the vehicles, they not only go out and do maintenance, but like I say, as they read the meters, they put the meters and they have to drive around through all the cities.
Right.
And they do that every month. So they get some miles on them.
Look for a motion.
Move to approve the purchase of the two trucks from Performance Ford for the amount printed here.
Second?
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Thank you.
All right, the next one we have is a cabin chassis. And if you remember last month, we actually went to bid and bought the tool bins or the toolboxes to be mounted on this. So this is just a cabin chassis. It's to replace the truck that we use for the hydros and the substations. It's replacing a 2004. This is a diesel truck with an extended cab that would go with that bed that we purchased last month. So it'd be the Power Commission staff's recommendation that we purchase this from Performance Ford for the low bid of $40,805.
Any questions? Look for a motion.
I'd like to make a motion. We